Hi, this is the edTPA commentary video, and today I'm going to share with you some ways that you can utilize your edTPA resources in order to answer the commentary questions. For this video, I'm going to be utilizing the secondary math edTPA materials because those tend to be have the most common elements throughout all of the edTPA programs, but every program in edTPA has very similar components to it. And so just make sure that you're looking at your own program as I'm talking about this, and I will try to show you where you can utilize, like where different things would match with different programs. So the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you have your understanding rubric level progression. You have the writing organizers at hand, and you have the commentary at hand. Now, your handbook is also going to have the rubrics in it for kind of a quick reference. But that understanding rubric level progression is really going to dive down deep. The other resource that you're going to want to have for later on, for when you answer prompt 4, is this academic language resource right here. And that document is going to be helpful for when you are answering prompt 4. However, early childhood, you do not have an academic language handbook because you're only going to be focusing on vocabulary. And special ed, you do have an academic language document. However, you may, depending on your subject matter that you are teaching, you may also choose to look at the elementary or the mathematics. It might be more helpful. All right, so once you have those items downloaded, one of the reasons I strongly suggest that you print out the understanding rubric level progression is because you're going to be using it at the same time as you're looking at the commentary and this writing organizer. And so for me, just being here and talking to you, it's not as critical that I have the commentary as a full screen, but when you're actually typing, you really won't want to be flipping back and forth between multiple windows. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to look at the understanding rubric level progression and remember back to the workshop when we went through the understanding rubric level progression and we were paying very close attention to these tan colored rectangles here. So remember, that is where the scorer is going to look for the primary evidence. And you already should have made a little bit of a cheat sheet for yourself where you have each rubric aligned with where the scorer is looking for that evidence. So for rubric 1, which is the planning for understanding, the primary evidence is going to come from prompt 1 right here. You will see in the understanding rubric level progression that there is an automatic 1 for some of the rubrics, not all, but you're going to want to pay close attention to that. So even if you were to meet all of the level 3, 4, and 5, if you had something in this automatic 1 for this one, it is a pattern of significant content inaccuracies are being planned for, then you would get an automatic 1. And then also a pattern of misalignment. Now, this is going to be very important that you are going to want everything to align from your standard to your objective. Then you're going to be able to align that objective directly with the instructional plans that you plan and then to those assessments that you plan. So it should be very obvious if I look at a worksheet that you have in your assessment materials, if I look at a PowerPoint slide that you have in your instructional materials, if I look at any of your activities that you planned, that it is obvious that you are addressing the objective in that. Each one of these prompts, you should be talking about why it matters to the objective. I should see you write, this addresses the learning objective because, or the learning objective is being assessed here because, or the learning objective matters because, or this informs the learning objective because, or whatever it is, but something that says this aligns with the learning objective because of, and then you spell it out. That should be in every single prompt that you write. Always circle back to how it aligns with that learning objective. Right, so the next step is to look at your understanding rubric level progression and start at the level 3 because that's where the score is going to be focusing. And I want to look at these key words that are bolded. And you're going to notice that these keywords that are bolded here are also going to be bolded over here someplace in that prompt. I also suggest that as you are typing your answer, that you bold those key terms so that the scorer can easily identify. So just like the context for learning, when you answer, you're going to type everything inside of the brackets. Even if, like this, has multiple bullet points here, you're still going to type it inside of the brackets. So for this, I'm looking, and for a level 3, I'm seeing that the plans build on each other. They're making connections and they're explicit. There's components of subject-specific emphasis. But when I'm looking at this, I'm noticing that as I'm reading through these prompts, that prompt 1C has the majority of those components of a level 3. As I look down at a level 4 and 5, a level 4 and 5 are saying that this is happening in every lesson. It's deepening the student's understanding. I'm making connections. That seems to be more in line with a 1B. So what that tells me is that in order to score a 3 or higher, I really need to focus a lot of my effort on 1C. Then I can go back and write 1B. But if 1C is not answered really, really well with a lot of detail and a lot of examples, I'm not going to score a 3 or higher, no matter how well I answer 1B. When I'm looking at my writing organizer here, some people choose to print these off. Some people just choose to kind of glance at them and use them as a way to write. But notice that 1C, it really only is showing me that I need like 2 sentences, 3 sentences. Really no more than 3 or 4 sentences is necessary for 1A. It's really just an overview of that central focus to get the scorer's feet wet and really have them understand what's going on, and then you move on. Then in 1B, there is a graph that could help you to identify the different parts that you need, and you're going to see similar things throughout. So just like we've got an organizer for like different paragraphs, different charts to help you organize. Did I meet all of these things that the individual prompt is asking for? So this is going to help you break down those prompts and really ensure that you have addressed the prompt entirely and all of those different questions that are kind of lumped together within the prompt. All right, so the next thing, going on to prompt 2. Now, prompt 2 and prompt 3, you actually need to answer at the same time. Prompt 1, maybe you sit down and you answer prompt 1 on its own day, and then prompt 4 and 5, you can answer on their own day, but prompt 2 and 3, you need to answer at the same time, and here's why. Because prompt 2 is really asking you to focus on what you know about the students in respect to the central focus and the learning objective. And prompt 3 is asking you to explain and justify why you did, like what you did. Because you knew the things in prompt 2, what did you plan for in the lesson plan? So let's go back to prompt 2 here and look at it. So as I am looking at my rubric, look, rubric 2 is being scored by prompt 2 and 3. Rubric 3 is also being scored by prompt 2 and 3. When I'm talking about knowledge of my students, it is very important that I am specifically talking about knowledge that I know that relates to that central focus or to the learning objective, and I am directly tying this to the learning objective. It's important that I know this about my students to address the learning objective because this is usually not a problem with prior academic learning, because students usually say, in order to know this about the central focus and in order for students to understand the objective, they need to be able to do X, Y, and Z first. Perfect. But when we get down to this personal, cultural, community assets, things kind of get a little loose. And And candidates tend to want to throw the whole kitchen sink at the score and say, hey, look at how diverse my class is. Like, I've got all these things. I know all these things about my students. But that's not what the score is looking for. They want to know, can you know all these things about the students? And can you pick out what is going to matter the most according to address your learning objective and your central focus? So these could be things like that you know that your students enjoy a certain TikTok trend right now, and so you incorporated that into your learning objective, or I'm sorry, into your lesson plans. This could also be that you know that they enjoy a certain sport, and so you incorporated that into the lesson plan somehow. This could be that you know that they've had a certain opportunity afforded to them because of the community that they live in that is going to directly be tied to the learning objective. If you have a student that is bilingual and speaks French fluently, but you are not addressing it anywhere in your lesson plans, then you don't need to tell the score of that information, because they're going to be looking at this, and unless you directly tie it to something that you are doing in your lesson plans, they're just going to ignore that. So as I'm going down to prompt 3. So prompt 3 has this word justification and justify. When I see that word, I know that I am going to need to use research or theory to support my my statement and what I did in my lesson plans. edTPA is wanting to know that you can not only plan a good lesson plan, but you know why it's a good lesson plan. You know that you are able to look at these lesson plans and use theory. I have the link for the edTPA-Theorist.com right next to this video. I think it's going to be below the video. But remember, we looked at this during the workshop. And this is going to be a really great resource for you to look at, like, this planning and assessment and what are you doing, which theorist is going to be the most helpful for you. Look at, are you using collaboration problem solving? Are you using peer collaboration? Are you using zone of proximal development? All of those things are going to go straight back to Vygotsky. So if you're using any of these, you can talk about why Vygotsky said it was important. If you are using schemas, or you're using anything with the imaginary play and that pre-operational stage, then your Piaget is going to be your person that you're talking about. If you are wanting to talk about those basic needs and self-fulfillment, then here's Maslow. So you can go through this, and this is going to be really helpful in answering prompt 3. Whoop. Right. So we want to, in prompt 3A, we're justifying our students, we're justifying what we're teaching based on the students' prior academic, personal, cultural assets. Okay. So that means that we're talking about what we said we know about the students in prompt 2, and we are directly giving examples from the lesson plans. You're going to be telling the score in lesson 1 on page 3, in lesson plan 4 on page 8, in lesson plan 3 on page 2. This is what I did. Okay. In 3B, you're going to justify why your instructional strategies and plan supports are appropriate for the whole class, individual, and groups. Now, it is critical to address any students that have an IEP or 504 plan that you talked about in the context for learning. You could say, because of the universal design of my lesson plan, my students with an IEP were not needed, or it was not needed to have any additional accommodations for them. That's fine. All edTPA is asking is to make sure that you actually looked at those IEP or 504 plans and you made sure that legally you were doing the bare minimum to address what that legally binding document says. Right. When I'm going back to my rubric and I'm looking at rubric 2, if I want to know where the majority of that score, which part of the prompt is going to be critical, I'm going to look at this level 3, and it says the candidate explains how the plan supports address the needs of the learners right here. Okay, so which part of the prompt is that? Well, coming down here, I'm looking, and right here in 3A, this is the part of the prompt where I am stating how I plan to I'm sorry, no, it's part 3B. 3B is where I am describing how those plan supports, look right here, plan supports. So at a level 3 whole class, when I want to go and think about those individual students or those individual groups of students, now all of a sudden I'm above a 3. So if you can talk about the whole class and then also a group of students like your gifted students, what are you doing for them? Then that's going to take you from a 3 to a 4. So then when I'm going down and I'm looking at rubric 3, knowledge of students, this is where 3A is going to be kind of your meat and potatoes for getting that knowledge of rubric 3. That doesn't mean that prompt 2 isn't important, but prompt 2 is more of the background knowledge, and then prompt 3 is here's what I actually did. Here's where the examples are from the lesson plans. Now, prompt 4 is a little bit different than the other prompts. So prompt 4, several of the questions you are not going to write a whole lot for. You may even write just one word or one sentence for. So when we talk about language function, a lot of times when you look at either your state standard or your objective, it's going to be the verb in many cases. So part 4A, you are identifying which language standard you are utilizing for this series of lessons. So you want to just pick one of these, and then you can just type which one you picked here. You can say, my language function is justify. That's all you need to do. Then for B, you're going to identify the key learning task from your plans that provides your students with the opportunity to practice that language function. You are just picking one lesson plan. You may have talked about justify throughout all of your lesson plans. You may have been encouraging students to learn how to justify or whatever your language function is in all of them. But you're only dissecting, you're only looking through that magnifying glass at one lesson plan. So when I'm looking at any of prompt 4, I'm just talking about one lesson plan. So right here, you just write lesson 1, lesson 3, lesson 2, whatever lesson you want to look at. And then, now here's where early childhood kind of takes a detour, because early childhood, you're only talking about vocabulary. Everybody else, you are going to be talking about vocabulary, discourse, and syntax. Math, you also have this mathematical precision that you're going to be talking about. But for 4C, you really just list. You can even keep it at bullet points within the brackets, right? But you can say vocabulary. Here's the vocabulary words that my students need to know in order to be able to do that language function. Justify, right? Maybe we're working on a mathematical proof, and that's how we're justifying the answer. Okay, so in order to do that, students would need to know the word proof and how it operates in the world of math. But sometimes in elementary particularly, we have like the vocabulary words for the week. That's not what edTPA is looking for. They're wanting to know what vocabulary, what symbols do you need to teach the students to be able to do your language function. Okay. Then discourse and syntax. The easiest way for me to explain what discourse and syntax is to actually go to your academic language document right here. So it is going to explain for your specific program what discourse and syntax means. And then it's going to actually give you examples. So here's math. Here's the function. It gives you some examples. Gives you some examples of vocabulary, and then it gives you the definition of discourse in the mathematics program, and then examples. And it's going to do that same thing for syntax and examples. So discourse is how members of the discipline talk, write, and participate in knowledge and construction. For music, it's going to be a little bit different, right? It's going to be how the discourse could be not only writing and talking, but also creating music. Then the syntax is the rules for organizing. So it's going to give us some examples. So please, please, please look at this document if you are confused about discourse and syntax, because it is subject specific. If you are still confused, please arrange a meeting with me or come to one of my open writing workshops and we can discuss this grader, but each program content area is going to be a little bit different. And so that's why I'm going to leaving it up to you to look at this resource. So after you have listed the very specific things that you are going to they're going to need to know, you're just identifying them. You're not even you're not stating how you're teaching them in 4C. You're just identifying what they need to know. Then in 4D, this is where you refer to your lesson plans and you tell me what you did in that one lesson that you chose, right? Not throughout all of the lessons, but that one lesson plan you chose. How did you support the students' learning of that discourse? How did you support the students' learning of that vocabulary to be able to do the language function? So if in this situation for math, if they are going to be providing a proof, the proof itself would be the discourse. And so, but the organization that they need to know in order to create a proof would be the syntax. And so if this is their first proof that they have done, how did you explain how to organize that to them? How did you teach them that? Then, and in prompt 4, the majority of the score is going to come from 4D, that language supports. Then in prompt 5, we're monitoring the student learning. Within each lesson, it's critical that you have multiple forms of assessment. Now, these can be very informal assessments. So this could be that you're walking around the room, and when you're walking around the room, what are you checking out? What are you looking at the student's paper? What questions are you asking the students? Within that assessment document that you have to create for task 1, you need to be discussing, like, you can include questions that you're going to ask the students. You also need to address your IEP and 504 plans. Now, once again, if those students do not provide any testing accommodations, you can just say, this student does not require any accommodations for assessment. Or you can say, I have created my assessments to be able to accommodate my student with an IEP without any additional modifications. Okay. So, as a review, when you are completing your commentary, read through the prompt, then go to your understanding rubric level progression, read through, find out where the majority of the score is coming from, look for those keywords, look for those key details, and then finally go to your writing organizer and think about how you're going to answer those prompts and go back to the prompt. Thank you and happy writing.